John Miller never thought he would end up in a courtroom. The tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair had once stood proud in his Marine uniform. Now, at age 42, he sat hunched on a hard wooden bench outside Courtroom B in the Riverview County Courthouse, his calloused hands gripping a worn metal cane. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making his headache worse. John closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push away the memories that always seemed to lurk just beneath the surface. 15 years in the Marines, 3 tours in Afghanistan, and then, on a dusty road outside Kandahar, an explosion that changed everything. Mr. Miller. A thin woman in a navy blue suit approached, clutching a stack of folders. "I'm Susan Green, your court-appointed attorney." John nodded and tried to stand, wincing as pain shot through his right leg. The doctors had saved it after the IED blast, but just barely. 3 surgeries later, it still didn't work right. "Please stay seated," Susan said, glancing at her watch. "We only have a few minutes before your hearing." She sat beside him and opened a folder with his name on it. John noticed how quickly she flipped through the pages, too quickly to really read anything. "So you were arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace at Pine Creek Mall," she said. "Says here you were shouting and refused to leave when security asked you to." John stared at his hands. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I got confused." Susan looked up from the papers. "Confused?" "I ran out of my meds 3 days before. Called the VA, but they said there was some problem with my paperwork." John rubbed his forehead. "I went to the mall to get out of the rain. Then I saw a kid in a red jacket, and suddenly I was back there in Afghanistan, and there was this boy in a red shirt who—" He stopped, unable to finish. The memory was too raw, too painful. Susan's expression softened slightly. "You have PTSD?" It wasn't a question. John nodded anyway. "And a traumatic brain injury," he added quietly. "From the explosion?" "Sometimes. I get confused about where I am." Susan made a quick note in his file. "Any prior arrests?" "No, ma'am, never even had a speeding ticket." She nodded and checked her watch again. "Judge Patterson is presiding today. She's fair but strict. Follow my lead, answer only what she asks, and we'll try to get you community service instead of jail time." Before John could respond, a court officer called his name. Susan stood and motioned for him to follow her into the courtroom. The room was bigger than John expected, with high ceilings and dark wood panels. A handful of people sat scattered among the rows of benches. At the front, behind a massive desk, sat Judge Elaine Patterson. She was in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Case number 247B, State versus John Miller, charges of criminal trespassing and disturbing the peace," announced the clerk. John limped forward with Susan, each step sending jolts of pain up his leg. The pain was bad today. Rain always made it worse, and it had been pouring for 3 days straight. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Patterson asked, looking down at her papers rather than at John. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Susan replied. "We request leniency due to extenuating circumstances." The judge looked up, her gaze sharp. "And those circumstances would be?" "Mr. Miller is a decorated Marine veteran with 15 years of service. He suffers from PTSD and traumatic brain injury sustained during combat in Afghanistan. At the time of the incident, he was experiencing confusion due to missed medication." Judge Patterson's expression didn't change. "Mr. Martinez, the state's position?" The prosecutor, a young man with slicked back hair and an expensive suit, stood. "While the state respects Mr. Miller's service, the fact remains that he frightened shoppers and refused to comply with security personnel. We recommend 30 days in county jail and a $500 fine." John felt his stomach drop. 30 days. He barely had enough money for rent this month. And his apartment. If he wasn't there to deal with the leaky roof and the mold that kept coming back, it would be uninhabitable when he got out. Susan began arguing for community service instead of jail time, but John could tell by the set of Judge Patterson's mouth that she wasn't swayed. He gripped his cane tighter, trying to stay upright as the room seemed to tilt slightly. "Your Honor," Susan was saying, "Mr. Miller has no prior record and—" Ms. Green, the judge interrupted, I'm well aware of the recommended sentencing guidelines. She shifted her gaze to John for the first time. Mr. Miller, do you have anything to add before I make my ruling? John swallowed hard. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, even before the explosion scrambled his brains. But he had to try. I'm sorry for what happened, Your Honor, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. I never meant to scare anyone, I got lost in my head for a bit. He paused, trying to find the right words. After Lisa, that's my ex-wife. After she left with the kids, things got harder. The house was too quiet. Too many hours to think about things I try not to remember. John hadn't planned to mention Lisa or the kids, the words just came out. 6 years of marriage, gone in less than 6 months after he came home broken. His daughter Penny had been 7, his son Jack only 4. He hadn't seen them in almost a year now. The mall was dry, and I thought I could just sit for a while, he continued. Then something happened. A sound, a color, I don't know. And suddenly I wasn't there anymore. I was back in Afghanistan and there was danger everywhere. The courtroom was quiet now. Even the prosecutor had stopped shuffling his papers. I know that doesn't excuse what I did. But I'm trying. I go to the VA when I can get a ride. I take the meds when I can get them. I'm not the man I used to be, but I'm trying to be someone my kids wouldn't be ashamed of. John fell silent, exhausted by the effort of speaking so many words at once. The pain in his leg had become a burning throb, and he shifted his weight, trying to find relief that wouldn't come. Judge Patterson studied him for a long moment. Her gaze dropped to his jacket, where a small Marine Corps pin was fastened to the lapel. It was the only thing from his uniform he still wore. A reminder of who he had been. Something in the judge's expression changed. It was subtle. A slight softening around the eyes, a barely perceptible tilt of her head. If John hadn't been trained to notice details, to spot the smallest changes that might signal danger, he would have missed it. Mr. Miller, Judge Patterson said, her tone different now. How long did you serve in the Marines? The question seemed to catch everyone by surprise. Susan looked up from her notes, confused. The prosecutor frowned. 15 years, Your Honor, John replied. Enlisted right after high school in 1998. Medical discharge in 2013. Judge Patterson removed her glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them on the desk in front of her. The simple action somehow changed the atmosphere in the room. And your injury, she continued, that was during combat? John nodded. Yes, ma'am. IED on a road outside Kandahar. 3 of us made it. 2 didn't. The memories rushed back. The blinding flash, the world turning upside down. The screams of his friends, the copper smell of blood mixing with dust. John gripped his cane tighter, using the pain in his hand to anchor himself to the present. Judge Patterson was silent for a moment. Then she did something that no one in the courtroom expected. She pressed a button on her desk and spoke to her clerk. Nancy, I'd like to call a 15-minute recess. The clerk looked startled but nodded. All rise, she announced. Court is in recess for 15 minutes. As Judge Patterson stood and disappeared through a door behind the bench, whispers broke out across the courtroom. Susan turned to John, her expression puzzled. I don't understand, she said quietly. Judge Patterson never calls unexpected recesses. She runs her courtroom like a Swiss watch. John didn't understand either. He just knew that for the first time since he'd been arrested, he felt a small flicker of hope. Something had changed in that courtroom. Something important. And he couldn't help wondering what would happen when Judge Patterson returned. The 15-minute recess stretched to 20. John sat on the hard wooden bench, his leg throbbing. Susan paced back and forth, checking her watch every few minutes. The young prosecutor, Kevin Martinez, stood near the door, talking quietly, on his phone. This is unusual, Susan said, sitting down next to John. I've appeared before Judge Patterson dozens of times. She never takes unexpected breaks. John didn't respond. He was too busy trying to manage the pain that radiated from his knee to his hip. He had taken his last pill that morning, hoping to be clear-headed for court. Now he regretted that decision. The door behind the judge's bench opened, and Nancy, the court clerk, emerged. She spoke briefly to the bailiff, who nodded and walked over to John and Susan. "The judge would like to see counsel in her chambers," he said. Susan looked surprised. "Both of us?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Martinez, too." Susan touched John's shoulder. "Wait here. I'll find out what's going on." John watched as Susan and Kevin followed the bailiff through a side door. The minutes ticked by slowly. The few people in the courtroom whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing in his direction. John stared at the floor, tracing the pattern in the worn carpet with his eyes. Anything to distract from the pain. Almost 30 minutes after, the recess began. The side door opened. Susan and Kevin returned, followed by the bailiff. Susan's face gave nothing away, but Kevin looked frustrated. "What happened?" John asked as Susan sat beside him. Before she could answer, the bailiff called the court to order. "All rise. The Honorable Judge, Elaine Patterson, presiding." John struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. Judge Patterson returned to the bench, her face as unreadable as ever. But something had changed. John could sense it the way he used to sense danger on patrol. "Be seated," Judge Patterson said. The rustle of movement filled the courtroom. Then silence fell again. The judge looked directly at John. "Mr. Miller, after consulting with counsel, I've decided to take an unusual approach in your case." John glanced at Susan, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Before I rule on the charges against you," Judge Patterson continued, "I'd like to hear more about your military service." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even Nancy, the clerk who had probably seen everything in her years of service, looked surprised. "Your Honor?" John wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "Tell us about your time in the Marines, Mr. Miller," Judge Patterson said. Her voice remained formal, but there was something softer in her tone now. "Where you served, what you did, what happened to bring you here today. In your own words." Kevin Martinez stood up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the defendant's military record, while admirable, isn't relevant to the charges at hand. The state objects to this irregular proceeding." Judge Patterson fixed Kevin with a steady gaze. "Objection noted, Mr. Martinez. However, this court has discretion to gather information it deems relevant to sentencing. Please be seated." Kevin sat down, his lips pressed into a thin line. Judge Patterson turned back to John. "Mr. Miller, you may proceed when ready. Take your time." John looked around the courtroom. All eyes were on him now. His heart raced. Speaking in front of people had never been easy for him, even before the explosion scrambled his brain. Susan leaned over. "Just tell your story," she whispered. "Like you were telling a friend." John took a deep breath and began. "I joined the Marines 2 days after high school graduation. My dad had been a Marine, and his dad before him. It was a family tradition, I guess." His voice was quiet at first, barely carrying beyond the first row. Judge Patterson leaned forward. "Slightly. Could you speak up a bit, Mr. Miller? We'd all like to hear your story." John nodded and continued, his voice stronger. "I was stationed at Camp Lejeune first, then overseas, Japan, then Korea. My first combat deployment was to Iraq in 2003. I was 23 years old." As John spoke, the courtroom faded away. He was back in the desert, feeling the weight of his pack, the grit of sand in everything, the bond with his fellow Marines that was stronger than family. "We lost Pete, Private Peter Hall, 3 weeks in. Sniper fire. He was 19, had a girlfriend back home named Mary. They were going to get married when he returned." John paused, surprised by the details he remembered. Names and faces he hadn't let himself think about for years. "I did 2 tours in Iraq, then Afghanistan starting in 2009. That's where I met Lisa, my ex-wife. She was an Army nurse at the base hospital. We got married during my leave in 2010, had our daughter Penny a year later." Judge Patterson nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I missed Penny's birth. Was on a mission when Lisa went into labor early. Didn't see my daughter until she was 3 months old. John's voice grew thick with emotion. She was so tiny, had my mother's eyes. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even Kevin Martinez was listening intently. When I got back from that tour, Lisa was pregnant again, with Jack. I was home for his birth, best day of my life. John smiled at the memory. But 2 months later I was deployed again. Afghanistan, 3rd tour. John's smile faded. His hand tightened around his cane. It was October 17th, 2013. I remember because it was Lisa's birthday. I had called her that morning, promised I'd be home for her next birthday. John stopped, the memories washing over him, the sunlight on the road, the radio chatter, the flash of movement in his peripheral vision. We were on patrol outside Kandahar, 5 of us in a Humvee. I was in the lead vehicle with Sergeant Steve Ramirez driving. Ryan Cooper was on comms. Dale Franklin and Mike Ortiz were in the back. The names came easily now, as if his friends were right there with him. We'd done that route a dozen times. It was supposed to be secure. John shook his head. The IED was buried under the road. We never saw it coming. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. The explosion flipped our Humvee. Steve and Ryan died instantly. Dale lost both legs. Mike had a head injury, but he recovered. And I... John gestured to his right leg. Shrapnel tore through my leg. Broke it in 4 places. Doctors wanted to amputate, but a surgeon named Dr. Harris thought he could save it. 3 surgeries later, I still have my leg. Doesn't work great, but it's mine. He tapped his temple. The traumatic brain injury was worse in some ways. Memory problems, headaches. Sometimes I forget where I am or what I'm doing. And the PTSD. John looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. When I got home, I wasn't the same man Lisa had married. The nightmares were bad. I'd wake up screaming, thinking I was back there. Couldn't stand loud noises. Crowds made me panic. 4th of July was the worst. The fireworks sounded like incoming fire. Several people in the courtroom nodded in understanding. One older man in the back wiped his eyes. Lisa tried. She really did. But it was too much. Me jumping at shadows, getting lost on the way to the grocery store because I forgot where I was going. The mood swings. After a year, she took the kids and moved back to her parents' place in Ohio. John's voice cracked. I don't blame her. She deserved better than what I could give her. The kids deserved better too. He took a moment to compose himself before continuing. After they left, things got worse. The VA benefits were delayed because of some paperwork issue. Couldn't afford my apartment anymore. Ended up in that little place on Elm Street. You know the one. The building should be condemned. John noticed Judge Patterson nodding slightly. She knew the place. My truck broke down, so I couldn't get to my VA appointments regularly. When the prescription ran out, I called, but they said I needed to come in person. No transportation, no money for a taxi, so I just went without. John straightened in his chair, looking directly at Judge Patterson now. That's how I ended up at the mall that day. It was raining. My roof leaks. I just wanted somewhere dry to sit for a while. Then a kid ran by wearing a red jacket, and suddenly I was back in Afghanistan. There was this boy in a red shirt who used to sell trinkets near the base. He was there the day before the explosion. I started yelling for everyone to get down, to take cover. I thought I was saving them. John's shoulders slumped. The security guard tried to help at first, but I wasn't making sense. When he touched my shoulder, I reacted badly. Thought he was an enemy. That's when they called the police. He fell silent, exhausted by the effort of telling his story. The pain in his leg had become a dull roar, but he barely noticed it now. Thank you, Mr. Miller, Judge Patterson said after a moment. Her voice was softer than before. Is there anything else you'd like the court to know? John looked around the courtroom. Some people were wiping tears. Others sat very still, their faces reflecting a mix of emotions. Sadness, respect, shame. Just that I'm sorry, John said simply. I never meant to scare anyone. And I'm trying to do better. For my kids. For myself. For my friends who didn't make it back. Judge Patterson nodded slowly. She removed her glasses and pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture that made her seem suddenly human, vulnerable. When she looked up again, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. For several moments, the courtroom was completely silent. Judge Patterson sat very still, her glasses in her hand, her eyes fixed on John. Then she put her glasses back on and cleared her throat. "This court will take a brief recess," she announced. "We will reconvene in 20 minutes." Without waiting for a response, she rose and disappeared through the door behind the bench. The bailiff called for everyone to rise, but Judge Patterson was already gone. People began to whisper as soon as the door closed. Susan turned to John, her expression a mix of surprise and hope. "I've never seen Judge Patterson react like that," she said quietly. "She's known for being tough but fair. I've never seen her show so much emotion." John nodded, too tired to speak. Telling his story had drained him. All those memories he tried so hard to keep locked away had come flooding back. The faces of Steve and Ryan, the sound of the explosion, Lisa's tearful goodbye, his children's confused faces the last time he saw them. "Do you need some water?" Susan asked, noticing how pale he looked. "Please," John managed to say. His throat was dry from talking so much. While Susan went to find water, an older man approached John. He was in his 70s with white hair and a slight limp. He wore a simple blue suit with an American Legion pin on the lapel. "Vietnam, 1969 to 1971, the man said by way of introduction. "Frank Butler, Army." John looked up. "John Miller, Marines, Afghanistan." Frank nodded. "I heard. You told it well, son. Brought it all back for me." "I'm sorry," John said. Frank shook his head. "Don't be. Some things need to be remembered. Some stories need to be told." He patted John's shoulder and returned to his seat just as Susan came back with a paper cup of water. John drank slowly, trying to gather his strength. His leg was on fire now, the pain radiating up to his hip. He shifted in his seat, trying to find a position that hurt less. "Are you okay?" Susan asked, noticing his discomfort. "Pain's bad today," John admitted. "Used my last pill this morning." Susan frowned. "I'll see if we can get this wrapped up quickly." Before she could say more, the door opened and Judge Patterson returned. Everyone scrambled to their feet as the bailiff called the court to order. John gripped his cane tightly, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of standing. "Please be seated," Judge Patterson said. Her voice was steady again, but her eyes were different, softer somehow, more human. Once everyone was seated, she folded her hands on the bench and looked directly at John. "Mr. Miller, thank you for sharing your story with this court. Your service and sacrifice for our country deserve our deepest respect and gratitude." She turned to look at the prosecutor. "Mr. Martinez, does the state wish to respond?" Kevin Martinez stood. He looked uncomfortable, as if he knew he was on the wrong side of the room's sympathy. "Your Honor, while the state acknowledges and respects Mr. Miller's service, the fact remains that his actions at the mall caused distress to patrons and could have escalated into a more serious situation. The law must be applied equally to all citizens, regardless of their background." Judge Patterson's expression hardened slightly. "Is the state aware that Mr. Miller's actions were directly related to injuries sustained while serving his country?" Martinez shifted his weight. "Yes, Your Honor. However, and is the state aware that Mr. Miller's access to necessary medication was disrupted due to administrative issues at the VA, a system designed to support our veterans?" "I can't speak to that specific." "Mr. Martinez," Judge Patterson interrupted, "is the state familiar with the Veterans Treatment Court initiative that has been implemented in many jurisdictions across the country?" Martinez looked confused by the change in direction. "Only generally, Your Honor." Judge Patterson nodded. "Then allow me to educate you. Veterans Treatment Courts were created to address the unique challenges faced by veterans in the criminal justice system. They recognize that many veterans' legal issues stem directly from service-related injuries and trauma. Instead of punishment, they focus on treatment and support." She looked around the courtroom. "Unfortunately, our county does not yet have such a court." That is an oversight I intend to address in the very near future." A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Susan leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. Judge Patterson turned her attention back to John. "Mr. Miller, this court finds that while your actions did technically violate the law, they must be viewed in the context of your service, your injuries, and the systemic failures that led you to that mall on that day." John held his breath. Was she going to let him go? "Therefore, I am conditionally dismissing the charges against you, contingent upon your participation in a treatment program that I will personally help arrange. This will include proper medical care, counseling, and assistance with your VA benefits." John could hardly believe what he was hearing. Susan squeezed his arm in excitement. "Furthermore," Judge Patterson continued, "this court finds that you have been failed by the very systems designed to support you after your service. That is unacceptable and will be addressed." She looked at the court clerk. "Nancy, please note in the record that I am ordering the creation of a task force to establish a veterans treatment court in our county. I will be speaking with the chief, judge, and county commissioners this afternoon." Nancy nodded, typing rapidly. Judge Patterson then did something completely unexpected. She stood up and stepped down from the bench. The entire courtroom fell silent in shock. Judges simply didn't leave the bench during proceedings. She walked slowly to where John sat and extended her hand to him. Stunned, John struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane, and shook her hand. "Mr. Miller," Judge Patterson said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom, "I want to tell you why your story affected me so deeply." She took a deep breath. "My son William served in the Marines from 2009 to 2014. He was in Afghanistan too, though in a different region than you. He came home with many of the same injuries, both physical and invisible." John's eyes widened in surprise. The judge was sharing something deeply personal, something he suspected few people in that courtroom knew. "William struggled for 2 years after his return," Judge Patterson continued. "The VA was backlogged. Appointments were months apart. Prescriptions ran out. The system that should have helped him failed him at every turn." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. 3 years ago, William took his own life. He left a note saying he couldn't live with the pain anymore. He was 32 years old. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Susan covered her mouth with her hand. Even Kevin Martinez looked shocked. "I'm so sorry," John said quietly. Judge Patterson nodded. "After William died, I promised myself I would do everything in my power to prevent other veterans from falling through the cracks. But until today, until I heard your story, I didn't realize how much more I could be doing, should be doing." She turned to address the entire courtroom. "What happened to Mr. Miller, what almost happened here today, is a failure of justice. It's a failure of our community, and it's a failure I intend to correct." Judge Patterson looked back at John. "Starting with you, I'm going to make sure you get the help you need, the help you've earned through your service." John couldn't speak. His throat was tight with emotion. This woman, who had lost her son to the same battles he was fighting, was offering him a lifeline. "Thank you, Your Honor," he finally managed to say. Judge Patterson smiled slightly, the first smile anyone in that courtroom had ever seen from her. "No, Mr. Miller, thank you for your service and for your honesty today." She returned to the bench. "This case is dismissed. Court is adjourned." As the bailiff called for everyone to rise, John noticed that many people in the courtroom were wiping tears from their eyes. Even Nancy, the clerk who had probably seen everything in her years of service, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Judge Patterson gave John one last nod before she left the bench. In that simple gesture, he saw something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Susan turned to him, her eyes shining. "Do you understand what just happened? She's going to help you, John. Really help you." John nodded, still processing the unexpected turn of events. For the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things might get better. As John left the courtroom with Susan, he felt like he was in a dream. People he didn't know came up to shake his hand or pat his shoulder. Frank Butler, the Vietnam veteran, gave him a business card for the local American Legion post. "Come by, anytime," Frank said. "We meet on Thursday nights. Good group of folks who understand." John nodded and pocketed the card. His mind was still trying to process what had happened. Just hours ago, he had been facing jail time. Now he was free, with promises of help he hadn't dared to hope for. Susan led him to a small conference room down the hall. "Judge Patterson asked us to wait here," she explained. "She wants to talk to you privately after she finishes her docket." John sank gratefully into a chair. His leg was screaming in pain now. "Do you think she meant what she said? About helping?" "Me?" Susan smiled. "I've known Judge Patterson for 7 years. I've never seen her make a promise she didn't keep." They waited in comfortable silence. John closed his eyes, letting the events of the day wash over him. He thought about Judge Patterson's son, William, another Marine who had struggled after coming home, another warrior defeated not by enemies abroad but by the battle at home. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Nancy, the court clerk, entered with a tray holding a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. "Judge Patterson thought you might be hungry," she said, placing the tray in front of John. "She'll be here in about 20 minutes. John realized he hadn't eaten since yesterday. "Thank you," he said, his stomach rumbling at the sight of food. Nancy smiled kindly. "My husband was Army, 2 tours in Iraq. I understand a little of what you're going through." After she left, John ate slowly, savoring each bite. The simple sandwich, turkey and cheese, tasted better than any meal he could remember. Susan checked her watch. "I need to make a few calls. Will you be okay for a few minutes?" John nodded, his mouth full. Once alone, he let his guard down slightly. His hands shook as he picked up the water bottle. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, leaving him exhausted and in pain. He was dozing lightly when Judge Patterson entered the room. She had removed her judicial robe and now wore a simple gray suit. Without the robe and the bench, she looked smaller, more human. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. John jerked awake, wincing as the sudden movement sent pain shooting through his leg. He tried to stand, but Judge Patterson waved him back down. "Please, stay seated. This isn't court anymore, just 2 people talking." She took the chair across from him, setting a folder on the table. "I meant what I said in there. I'm going to help you, not just with these charges, but with getting your life back on track." John looked at her warily. He had heard promises before. "With all due respect, Your Honor, how?" "First, call me Elaine when we're not in court," she said. "And second, I've made some calls. I have connections at the VA regional office. They're expediting your case." She opened the folder and slid a paper toward him. "This is an appointment for tomorrow morning. Dr. Helen Chen is one of the best pain management specialists in the state. She works with veterans, understands your kind of injuries. She'll make sure you get the medication you need." John stared at the paper, hardly believing what he was seeing. "How did you do this so quickly?" Judge Patterson, Elaine, gave a small smile. "I've been on the bench for 23 years. You make a lot of friends in that time. And when you tell people it's for a veteran who's been let down by the system, doors tend to open." She pulled out another paper. "This is the address for a better apartment. It's a complex that reserves units for veterans. Clean, well-maintained, affordable. They have a vacancy starting next week." John shook his head in disbelief. "I can't afford—" "It's subsidized," Elaine interrupted. "Your VA benefits, once they're straightened out, will cover it, and I've arranged for a temporary stipend until then." "Why are you doing this?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elaine was quiet for a moment. "After William died, I was angry. At the system. At the VA. At everyone who had failed. Him." Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened around the folder. "I threw myself into work. Became even stricter. More by the book than before. I thought I was upholding justice, but really, I was just trying to control something in a world that had taken my son from me." She looked directly at John. "When you stood in my courtroom today, I saw William. I saw all the veterans who come, home carrying burdens no one should have to bear. and I realized that all my anger, all my grief could be channeled into something better, something that might actually help. John nodded slowly. He understood anger as a shield against pain all too well. I can't bring William back, Elaine continued, but I can make sure his death wasn't completely in vain. I can use my position to help other veterans like him. Like you. She pulled out more papers from the folder. I've already spoken with the chief judge and 2 county commissioners. We're fast-tracking the creation of a veterans treatment court. It won't be easy and it will take time, but it's happening. John was overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Elaine replied. Just focus on getting better. That's all I ask. She hesitated, then added, There is one more thing. A favor, really. Anything, John said without hesitation. Once you're back on your feet, would you consider being a mentor for the Veterans Treatment Court? The program works best when veterans who have been through the system help guide those who are just entering it. John hadn't expected that. I'm not sure I'd be any good at helping others. I can barely help myself. Elaine smiled. That's exactly why you'd be perfect. You understand the struggle because you're living it. And from what I saw today, you have a powerful story to tell. Before John could respond, there was a knock at the door. Nancy peeked in. Judge, your 4:00 appointment is here. Elaine nodded. Thank you, Nancy. She turned back to John. Think about it. No pressure. She stood to leave, then paused. Oh, one more thing. She pulled a cell phone from her pocket and placed it on the table. This was William's. I kept it after. It's yours now. It's prepaid for a year. My number is programmed in. Call me anytime, day or night, if you need help. John stared at the phone. It was a simple gesture, but the meaning behind it was enormous. She was giving him a piece of her son, a connection, to the young Marine whose struggles had mirrored his own. I can't take this, he said. Please, Elaine said softly. It would mean a lot to me to know it's being used by someone who would understand William. Slowly, John reached out and took the phone. Thank you. Elaine nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Nancy will help you with the paperwork for your appointments, and I've arranged for a taxi to take you home today. She extended her hand and John shook it. Her grip was firm, reassuring. We'll talk soon, John. Take care of yourself. After she left, John sat alone in the conference room, looking at the papers spread before him. Doctor's appointments, housing, information, contact numbers for various support services, and William's phone, a tangible link to a Marine he had never met but somehow felt he knew. For the first time in years, John felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope. Nancy returned a few minutes later with more papers to sign. As John filled them out, she chatted about the weather, her husband's garden, ordinary things that suddenly seemed precious in their normalcy. The taxi should be here in about 10 minutes, she said when they finished. Judge Patterson paid for it to take you wherever you need to go today. John thought about his leaky apartment. It would be good to gather his few belongings, knowing he would soon be moving somewhere better. But there was somewhere else he needed to go first. Could the taxi take me to the VA office? I want to check on my benefits in person. Nancy smiled. Of course. I'll let the driver know. As John gathered the papers and carefully placed them in a folder Nancy had provided, he felt a new sense of purpose. The road ahead would not be easy. He still had his injuries, his PTSD, his brain that sometimes betrayed him. But now he had something he had lacked for too long: support. Someone who believed in him. Someone who saw his value beyond his broken parts and maybe, just maybe, a chance to help other veterans like himself find their way home. 1 year later, John stood outside the newly dedicated Veterans Treatment Court wing of the Riverview County Courthouse. The morning sun warmed his face as he read the simple bronze plaque beside the entrance. William Patterson Veterans Treatment Court, serving those who served us. John's hand went to his pocket, where he still carried William's phone. He had offered to return it to Elaine many times over the past year, but she always refused. "It's where it belongs," she would say. A lot had changed in 12 months. John's leg still hurt, especially in cold or rainy weather, but Dr. Chen's treatment plan had reduced his pain to manageable levels. His PTSD wasn't gone, it never would be, but regular therapy sessions had given him tools to cope with the flashbacks and nightmares. They came less frequently now. The new apartment was everything Elaine had promised: clean, quiet, with a small balcony where John grew tomatoes and peppers in pots. The building manager was a Gulf War veteran who understood bad days without judgment. Several other veterans lived there too, creating a small community that looked out for each other. Most importantly, John had purpose again. 3 months after that fateful day in court, he had called Elaine and accepted her offer to help with the Veterans Treatment Court program. Now he worked as a peer mentor, guiding other veterans through the system that had nearly failed him. "Morning, John," called a familiar voice. Frank Butler approached, walking more slowly than a year ago, but with the same straight-backed dignity. At 75, the Vietnam veteran remained active in veterans affairs across the county. "Morning, Frank, big day." Frank nodded. "Never thought I'd see it happen this fast. Judge Patterson is something else." They entered the building together. The new wing was modest but functional, with offices for counselors, meeting rooms for support groups, and a specialized courtroom designed to be less intimidating than traditional courts. Pictures of local veterans from different eras lined the walls, a reminder of the community this court was built to serve. In the main meeting room, volunteers arranged chairs and set out coffee and donuts. Today was the official opening ceremony, with local officials, veterans organizations, and media all expected to attend. John spotted Elaine talking with Dr. Chen near the podium. She looked different from the stern judge he had first met, more relaxed, with her silver hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in a severe bun. She laughed at something Dr. Chen said, then noticed John and waved him over. "There he is," Elaine said warmly. "Our first success story." John shook his head. "I'm just getting by, one day at a time." "Sometimes that's all any of us can do, Doctor," Chen replied. The petite doctor had become a friend over the past year, her gentle persistence helping John through the worst pain days. Elaine checked her watch. "Almost time. Are you ready for your speech?" John touched the folded paper in his breast pocket. He had worked on his remarks for weeks, wanting to get the words just right. Public speaking still made him nervous, but this was too important to let anxiety stop him. "As ready as I'll ever be," he said. Elaine squeezed his arm. "You'll be wonderful. Just speak from the heart like you did that day in court." People began filing into the room: county commissioners, the mayor, representatives from various veterans organizations, reporters from local papers and TV stations. John recognized Kevin Martinez, the prosecutor from his case, now one of the program's strongest supporters after seeing its value firsthand. A familiar face caught John's eye, and his heart skipped a beat. Lisa stood near the door with Penny and Jack. His ex-wife looked nervous, but the children bounced with excitement. Penny, now 9, spotted him first and broke into a run. "Daddy!" John knelt to catch his daughter in a hug, ignoring the twinge in his bad leg. Jack followed more cautiously, but his smile was just as bright. John hadn't seen them in person for almost 2 years before Elaine helped arrange a visit 3 months ago. Now they came every other weekend, staying in the guest room of his new apartment. "You came," John said to Lisa as she approached. She nodded. "The kids wouldn't miss it, and I wanted to see this for myself." She glanced around the room. "It's amazing what you've helped build here." Before John could respond, Nancy, still the judge's faithful clerk but now also the court coordinator, called for everyone to take their seats. John gave the children one more hug before they went to sit with their mother in the front row. Elaine stepped to the podium and the room fell silent. She spoke about the need for specialized courts to address the unique challenges faced by veterans. She shared statistics about success rates in other counties, about reduced recidivism and lives rebuilt. But it was when she spoke about her son that the room grew completely still. "William was a proud Marine who served his country with honor," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. When he came home, the system that should have supported him failed at every turn. His story ended in tragedy, but his legacy lives on in this court, in the veterans who will find help here instead of punishment, understanding instead of judgment. She gestured to John. A year ago, a veteran stood in my courtroom facing charges that resulted directly from injuries sustained in service to our country. That day changed both our lives. John Miller is now one of our peer mentors, proof that, with the right support, our veterans can overcome tremendous obstacles. I'd like to invite him to share his story with you. John walked to the podium on legs that felt surprisingly steady. He looked out at the faces watching him, some familiar, some strange, all attentive. He saw Lisa, her expression soft with a pride he hadn't seen in years. He saw his children, fidgeting but smiling. He saw Frank and the other veterans who had become a new kind of unit for him. And he saw Elaine, whose unusual request in a courtroom 1 year ago had changed everything. John unfolded his prepared remarks, then set them aside. Like Elaine had said, he needed to speak from the heart. My name is John Miller. I served as a Marine for 15 years, including 3 tours in Afghanistan. When I came home, I was broken in ways that don't always show on the outside. A year ago, I stood in a courtroom expecting justice to mean punishment. Instead, I found compassion. I found someone who saw past my charges to the person and the pain behind them. John's voice grew stronger as he continued, the words coming naturally now. What happened that day wasn't just about me. It was about recognizing a broken system and deciding to fix it. It was about one person using her position and her pain to create change. Judge Patterson could have sent me to jail. Instead, she offered me a hand up. And then she built this court to offer that same hand to others like me. He looked directly at Elaine now. Today, this court officially opens its doors, but its true foundation was laid a year ago, when a judge made an unusual request that brought a courtroom to tears. She asked a broken veteran to tell his story. She listened, and then she acted. John turned back to the audience. That's what this court is about, listening to veterans' stories, understanding the unique challenges we face, and then acting to help us find our way home, not just physically but mentally and emotionally too. As John continued speaking, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The nightmares would never completely disappear. The pain would always be part of him. But he was no longer alone in his struggles, and now neither would other veterans who came through these doors. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Penny and Jack jumped up and down, clapping wildly for their father. Lisa wiped tears from her eyes. Frank and the other veterans stood at attention, a silent salute more meaningful than words. Elaine joined John at the podium. And now, she said when the applause died down, I declare the William Patterson Veterans Treatment Court officially open. As the crowd moved toward the refreshment table, John felt a tug on his pant leg. Jack looked up at him with serious eyes. Dad, are you a hero now? John glanced at Elaine, at the courthouse around them, at the plaque bearing William's name. So many people had worked to make this day possible. So many stories had led to this moment. He knelt down to his son's level. Nobody. I'm just someone who got help when I needed it most, and now I'm trying to do the same for others. The real heroes are the ones who see someone in trouble and stop to help, like Judge Patterson did for me. Jack considered this, then nodded gravely. I think you're both heroes. Out of the mouths of babes, John thought as he hugged his son. Maybe the boy was right. Maybe heroes weren't just found on battlefields. Maybe they were also found in courtrooms, in hospitals, in everyday places where people chose compassion over judgment, help over punishment, and maybe, just maybe, he could be one of them.